As of May 2021, we have roughly 7.5 billion people living on this rock floating through space we call Earth. 7.5 billion is a lot, but humans seem to be doing alright. Well, kinda. Anyways, humans always had this fear of overpopulating the Earth. Experiments were made like the Mao Zootopia and then linked back to overpopulation. China introduced the one-child policy to keep its population from growing, and Battle Royale, the Japanese cult classic movie from the 2000s, was made based on that fear. The movie basically asked the question, how would you call the nation effectively to prevent overpopulation? Well, of course, you get the worst performing class of students, deploy them on an island, give them random equipment and force them to fight to the death until only one remains. If that sounds familiar, it's because the Hunger Games basically took that concept and turned into a successful YA novel, which then was turned into a very successful movie series. Hunger Games' popularity led to Battle Royale modes appearing in various different games. Primarily in Minecraft, but also in games like DayZ, H1Z1, and Rust. While there were successful BR titles like the Culling the Pass, the first huge success in the Battle Royale genre was of course PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, also known as PUBG, which set up the foundation for every consecutive Battle Royale. A big map, a high amount of players, roughly 100, random loot crates on the map, and a shrinking safe zone. If you think about it, Battle Royales are just the natural evolution of the survival genre that focuses heavily on PvP. Things like Hunger and Thirst are replaced with shields and the shrinking safe zone, and the survival game grind is replaced with random loot drops on the map. It is relatively easy to trace back where Battle Royales roughly come from. It's almost impossible to figure out how Battle Royales, and specifically PUBG, got successful. If I could make an educated assumption, I think the success of the Hunger Games movies primed the audience for the concept of a BR, which gave life to a little game called The Culling. After The Culling destroyed its own player base by pushing too many updates and leaving the game unfinished, people were thirsting for a new BR title, and when PUBG came out, it got picked up relatively quickly by a starving audience. Also, because BRs maximizes hours played and not so much the gameplay itself, there's a lot of downtime in which specifically streamers can interact with their chat without breaking the flow of the game, making BRs a perfect fit for streaming. And lastly, for anyone who has ever watched a BR game, the one thing that makes them special is the high tension that slowly builds throughout the game and is suddenly released once the last shot is fired. As mentioned before, PUBG was the first huge success in the Battle Royale genre. While still successful, being able to pull almost 500,000 players consistently, it's not the top dog anymore concerning popularity. That title goes to Fortnite. And while Fortnite was a huge failure in the beginning, the moment they introduced the Battle Royale mode, its success went through the roof. What made Fortnite stand out was primarily the building mechanics, but also the art style, the regularity of the updates, and various cross promotions with, for example, Marvel. We had a lot of BRs between then and now, and most of them failed. You had a few successes such as Apex Legends and Warzone, but both of them were backed up by a huge marketing budget that paid every streamer and their mom to stream the game on the day of release.
Oh my fucking god.
Online multiplayer games are always doomed to fail because they require a big enough player base to be able to be played. This counts double for BRs since they mostly require 100 players for one single round. Of course, you can circumvent that by introducing bots into the game, a thing that Fortnite has played around with, but after a while people will notice and leave the game relatively quickly because PvP players want to play against other players and on computers. Things like bugs, exploits and glitches will always be a problem in games, but if left untreated, it can lead to a mass exodus of the player base. And lastly, unpopular changes to the meta, the introduction of weapons, changes in the map, general changes to the core gameplay, etc. can and will lead to players leaving the game, especially if the player base keeps telling the developers not to change something and they do it anyways. These are the most obvious reasons why BR games fail, but there are more, and we're going to have a look at them by also looking back at the failed Battle Royales throughout the years.
Oh, who could have seen this coming? Whoa!
A little disclaimer here, I might get dates wrong, because some of those games get released into early access, then get a new day, re-released as betas, and then re-released again, so forgive me for inaccuracies. Also, there are simply too many BR games, but I will try to cover as many as possible, starting with deculling. Deculling, as previously mentioned, was the first success in the BR genre. It was released on March 2016 and quickly rose to fame. One of the content creators I used to watch was partially Royale and was probably deculling content creator number 1, pulling 100k views on each video. You could say that deculling was popular at the time. As far as I understand, the dev team were very active, releasing updates regularly and changing whatever the community wished for. Because of the constant changes though, a lot of players grew tired of the game, and after the dev team released the game out of early access while still having a bunch of bugs and glitches, the rest of the player base just left the game. The game was abandoned at some point and completely taken off the store page because Xavient didn't want to develop it further, and neither was anyone playing the game. Deculling is the perfect example of not knowing how to deal with runaway success and having no vision for your game. The dev team just went along whatever the community wanted, introduced way too many changes, didn't balance the damage numbers whatsoever, and never improved on the core gameplay. They just threw a bunch of stuff into a bowl hoping to have a nice tasting soup at the end, and of course it didn't work out. A few months later, PUBG got released, and since there was no real competitor and an audience for this type of game, it got picked up pretty fast. Roughly 1 year later, on the 29th of August of 2017, Ark Survival of the Fittest was released, basically an offshoot of the game Ark, and this was of course a cash grab. Studio Wildcard is known for releasing broken games into early access, selling DLC while in the program, and actually never finishing their games properly. While many enjoy Ark Survival Evolved and Atlas, the Sea of Thieves clone, Ark Survival of the Fittest was clearly just made in a rush after the success of PUBG to try to cash in on the hype. This doesn't make the game low quality per se, but having an early access game still not finished and releasing another game into early access will ultimately stretch out the development team, and one of the games will ultimately suffer from that. In this case, since Ark Survival of the Fittest didn't take off, they just abandoned it and left to die. Other games that failed for similar reasons were of course Realm Royale from Hi-Rez, Z1 Battle Royale, formerly known as Z1 King of the Kill, and Ring of Elysium. Ring of Elysium is a fairly interesting case. It was released in September 2018 and was actually growing its player base for the first few months. What made the game stand out was the integration of things like snowboards and zip lines, and it was, at the time, graphically more impressive than its competitor PUBG. But that's about it. It was in many people's eyes just a PUBG clone, and since it was a Chinese game, many people refused to install it because, you know, Wildcard, Hi-Rez, and Daybreak weren't of course the only studios to hop on the trend. Cliffy B's studio that made the failed hero shooter Lawbreakers released Radical Heights into early access, and it's probably the most well-known attempt of chain-jacking in games of all times. It is such a blatant cash grab that even hardcore Cliffy B fans had to admit that this was just a complete shitshow. I don't think I have to explain why this game failed. Of course, not only established studios tried to hop on the BR bandwagon, Define Human Studio tried their luck with Island of Nine, Watchdog Studio, the creators of Survivarium, arguably one of the first Battle Royales, tried their hand with Hero Volts, and Xavient, the creators of the Culling, tried their hand with the Culling 2, which obviously was going to fail, because not only was it a bad PUBG clone, it was so incredibly badly monetized that only a madman could think this could ever work. There are, of course, more examples, and just to show how many PUBG and Fortnite clones there are, here are just a few of them. Rules of Survival, Deathfield, the Battle Royale of Disaster, Dig Pig Die, Creative Destruction, The Ark of Horizon, Cyber Hunter, Fortcraft, and every single other mobile clone in existence. I don't think I have to mention why those failed. I will not talk about them, they are uninteresting, they are clearly just cash grabs. Still, under this pile of mediocrity, there are some titles that stand out. In January 2018, a game was released called SOS Battle Royale. The thing that made this game stand out was the Twitch integration. While Battle Royales are already perfect for streaming, SOS tried to go further by implementing a voting system with whomever was watching the stream. On top of that, the game focused more on PvEVP scenarios where contestants had to fight over an artifact that was being held by a boss in the middle of the arena. You could also form alliances with other players during the game and of course betray everyone. The game was of course not free from jank, and while it required less players to be played, 16 in total, it didn't survive very long and was shut down fairly quickly. While there was nothing really wrong with this game, it was released at a time where a bunch of other Battle Royales were being announced, and while the Twitch integration was novel, the market was already being saturated by PUBG and Fortnite. And the same story was repeated with Darwin Project. Released mid-2018 in the midst of the Battle Royale hype, with a whooping 12,000 players at release. What made Darwin Project stand out was again the Twitch integration and the inclusion of a director that could make certain areas unavailable, make the life of players easier or harder, and just straight help one person to win. It was a novel concept, and I think this is also why it was killed. It is not very fun to play a really good round of a BR and end up losing because of things you cannot control at all. Also, Darwin Project was never popular to begin with, and could not hold its already small player base. It seems like many people have heard about this game, but no one has actually played it. Similar to SOS and Darwin, Hyperscape tried to integrate Twitch into the whole game, and they even had a neutral win condition known as the Crown. It was interesting, arguably better than in SOS and Darwin. Unfortunately, by that point Apex Legends had already been released, and most people that wanted fast movement and verticality already had their fill. On top of being an Epic exclusive, one of the first few updates gave everyone regenerating health, taking away the speed of the game and replacing it with hit and run tactics, basically pushing the already small player base completely off a cliff. Exclusivity seems to be one of those things that will keep players away as well. While I don't have numbers for games like Tetris 99, Mario BR, This Cycle, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Last Survivor, all of those are neither being streamed nor is anybody talking about them. JoJo BR might take the cake here because the game is not only Japan exclusive, it is also arcade exclusive. And at that point, can you even call it a failure if it wasn't even meant to be played by the majority of the world? It seems to me that JoJo BR is treated more like a novelty or a joke, and there are a few of those around as well. The best example being Totally Accurate Battlegrounds. They got a massive amount of hype at release, and as many other BRs on this list, immediately fell off the face of the earth. This is a game that didn't do anything wrong. It was just a joke and was treated as such. You can still play it, but apparently there's a huge cheating problem in the game. A similar fate befell Crust, F.O.A.D, formerly known as Cuisine Royale. It, again, was just a joke, clearly signaled through its description that says, Crust is a brutal MMO last man standing shooter. While multiplayer games are doomed to fail, joke multiplayer games fail even faster. Because after you play a few rounds, you're done with the joke, and you move on. It seems that when Battle Royale modes are used as commodities or just game modes, people move on quickly as well. CSGO Danger Zone, Battlefield 5 Firestorm, Fallout 76 Nuclear Winter, Forza Horizon 4 The Eliminator, BDO Shadow Arena, and Battlerite BR are the best examples here. While Shadow Arena and Battlerite are both standalone games, they can be considered just modes. And I know it sounds like a good idea to offer shooter players a Battle Royale mode, but it's a massive waste of time. In reality, people that are playing CSGO and Battlefield are not really interested in Battle Royales. They are already playing their preferred game mode. More baffling is trying to convert RPG players into PvP players. Fallout is at least a shooter, but BDO is an MMO that doesn't even focus on PvP battles. BDO players that want to duel are already doing that in BDO. The most baffling one is Forza Horizon though. Why would someone that plays a racing game be interested in Battle Royale? Racing players are already racing in the racing game. I do understand that those game modes are just made to cash in on the hype, but Battlerite might have taken the cake on how they handled their release. On the 26th of September 2018, Battlerite BR was released and failed immediately because not only did the game cost $20, it was promised to be a game mode in Battlerite. Not only did they manage to alienate their own audience by breaking the promise, they also alienated everyone else as well because they asked for money upfront. It is almost impossible to make a BR title that is pay to play because you need all the players you can get playing your game so that there are enough people to fill one round. Asking money upfront for a BR title cuts the potential player base by a huge margin. While the idea was novel, a MOBA-style battle royale, the game had burned so many bridges at the point of release that no matter what they did, this game was doomed to fail from the start. Now it's free to play, but they can barely reach 100 players consistently, and like many other games on this list, is full of cheaters and bots. Our last batch of games can be categorized on the term of interesting experiments. Rapture Rejects was an arcade shooter battle royale set up in the Happiness and Cyanide universe. That sounds interesting in itself, and the game was even published by TinyBuild, but immediately failed and was forgotten. It is still in early access, but trust me on this one, nobody's playing it or developing it. Super Animal Royale though had basically no player base for a whole year. For some reason at the end of 2020 got a huge spike in player numbers, and even though the player numbers have been halved, it is still pulling 1,000 players consistently. While it stands out with the art style, drops the player numbers to 64, and has a very fair progression system where you unlock weapon skins depending on how much you use the weapons, the future of this game will depend on if they acquire new players and generate money. A game that didn't generate enough money was Spec Ops: The Line. While not the biggest financial success, it get praised constantly for being a deconstruction of the whole gritty military shooters of the 2000s. The people who made Spec Ops: The Line went on to make a game called The Cycle, and the first time I heard about this game was in a magazine where they talked about how turbulent the development of Spec Ops: The Line was. And it seems that The Cycle has also seen better days. Since this game is an Epic exclusive, I don't have access to any player numbers, but given that there are barely any videos made on The Cycle and barely anyone is streaming the game, I assume that the player count might also be very low. While Twitch numbers are not the end-all be-all when it comes to player count, it seems that updates on this game have slowed down, and that is always an indicator that resources have been pulled away from the project. Maybe the Steam release can save the game, but I'm not really sure about that. What I am sure about is that I really like Sea of Thieves. It's not a good game. It might be one of the most boring games ever made. It's not balanced at all, there's a lot of jank, and the main gameplay loop is just meh. You fill up your boat with a bunch of idiots though, and it turns into a lot of fun. Everything is fun with friends, but Sea of Thieves provides a nice playground for that. Sea of Thieves does have an arena mode for more PvP focused people, but queue times are really long and most people play like assholes. Blazing Sails is trying to fill that specific niche. It is basically a Sea of Thieves clone mixed with Battle Royale. It was released on September 9th, 2020 to an audience of roughly 1,000 players. The main reason for that being that this game is in early access and costs $20. Like I mentioned before, it's almost impossible to make a paid Battle Royale, and it's doubly difficult to ask to pay for an early access Battle Royale. While Blazing Sails does stand out from Sea of Thieves, for example by simplifying things like pumping out water from your ship and adding several different types of bombs, weapons and grenades, it's simply doomed to fail because nobody's playing it and people who want to play Sea of Thieves are already playing Sea of Thieves. Releasing this as a free-to-play title might revitalize the project, but then again you might lose your already small player base and you would need to monetize the game differently. Whatever the next move is, it will probably be the wrong one. It might be the best PvP pirate battle royale out there, but with a non-existing player base, it won't survive for long. Even though I'm including our next game here, Population 1 is actually not a failed title. Since the release in October 2020, they have been able to keep a consistent player base of 100 people, with the max player count being 200. As you can guess, this is a VR title and it costs $25. There aren't many people who are willing to pay for a VR title, and not many people that actually have VR headsets, making the player base for this game very small. Unlike other titles, I think in this case it was the right move to make this a paid product instead of free to play, since their target audience are early adopters of VR headsets, and you can assume that most of those people will have more disposable income and are more willing to pay for their experiences. The future of this game will of course heavily depend on the success of VR headsets, so this is by no means a failure, but the future is undecided. While Population 1's future is uncertain, I think our next game might be on its last miles. Spellbreak, released on December 15th, 2020, stood out through its art style and being the first Wizard Battle Royale. While still being able to pull 1,000 players consistently, the player base will probably slowly dwindle, because unlike other BR titles, Spellbreak takes a huge amount of practice to be able to be played proficiently. There are so many spell combinations, combos, movement options, and skill expressions that it is almost impossible for a beginner to be able to jump into a round and have fun. This game is similar to the original Battle Right. It is probably the superior game in the genre, but because it requires such a high skill, new players just get turned off very easily. And here is where we reach the end of our journey. The future is of course upon us, and even after so many failures, Battle Royales are still being made, and BR itself has now become just a mode in other games. Civilization 6 will have a mode called Red Death. At some point Vampire Bloodlines was getting a BR, but I don't know if that's still on the table. Final Fantasy is also getting a BR called First Soldier. There's a cowboy battle royale called Grit in development, one joke BR called Last Man Sitting, a close quarter combat Asian inspired BR called Naraka Blade Point, yet another smartphone BR called Fallout 84 with a very stylized art style akin to Fortnite, and Scavengers released on May 21 that already has lost the majority of its player base. All of those will fail except for First Soldier, probably, maybe, and that's only because it's Final Fantasy.
Everybody knows shit. Fuck, I don't give a good goddamn.
I already talked about the major reasons why BRs fail, the high player count requirements being one of them, untreated bugs, glitches and exploits, but also unwarranted changes to the core gameplay or the unwillingness to change things up. Alongside those reasons, cheaters will always be a problem when left untreated, and of course, just abandoning your game will always make the game fail, especially if it's left in early access. Throughout the retrospective, we also learned that lack of vision can lead to an incoherent mess of a game, basically pushing away its own player base. Of course, we can't forget that creating cash grabs will always be immediately noticed by everyone, and in the same vein, BR game modes in titles where the core audience is already playing whatever they want will always be left by the wayside. Making BR joke games, while a novel idea, is from the outset just that, a novelty. And while there is potential with experimental ideas, if you're asking money up front for your unfinished product, or if it is exclusive to a certain country or platform, BRs will always suffer from a low player count, ultimately leading to its demise. The integration of Twitch is again, at first, a good idea, but nobody really cares. Most of the time when people are watching streams, they are doing something on the side anyways. SOS tried it, Darwin tried it, Hyperscape tried it, and nobody cared. BRs are already a genre that is perfect fit for streaming. It doesn't need another layer of integration to make the whole thing more interactive. It is literally a waste of time and resources. And finally, the market is saturated. It's comparable to the content I do. I review games and I do research on those. A lot of people do that. A lot of people do it better than I do. The majority of people watching this type of content are not watching me. Here's the reminder that I should like, comment and subscribe. Also check out my Patreon if you want. Creating another channel, similar to mine, will with high certainty fail. Not because you are better or worse than me, it's just because the audience already has its fill. Creating another first, third-person shooter battle royale, no matter how good it is, will always be a challenge. The only way to break into the market is by having a gigantic amount of money that you can throw at every streamer and their mom, and even then you need a really good game that appeals to a big enough audience so that your game can be played at all times. Even if you try to innovate the genre like Spellbreak or Blazing Sails, you will ultimately run into the problem of having a low player count. Battle royales are always, ultimately doomed to fail, and most of them just fail faster. With that said, I don't dislike battle royales. I tried quite a few of them and I would be interested in a Sea of Thieves BR or a simplified Wizard BR, but developers and publishers should realize that BRs are not a goldmine. Sure, you can monetize them fairly well with a bunch of cosmetics, but for that to be profitable, you need a high player count. I'm sure we will get more BRs in the future, and some of them will be interesting to look at, but most of them will fail on arrival. Fortnite, PUBG, Apex and Warzone might survive for a very long time, but even those might bleed out players at some point, either taking out the genre entirely, which I don't believe will happen, or just distributing the player base to the next big thing or next big things. Ultimately, what I want to show with this video is that there are way more failed BRs than successes, and even among the failures, there are some rough diamonds. If you notice BRs missing from this list, feel free to comment them down below and explain why they failed. As always, take care of yourselves and have a nice day.